Since the beginning, life has been defined by light. It shaped early cells and it powered biological evolution. For billions of years, full spectrum natural sunlight was the only light source that drove and directed all of biological activity. As humans and our ancestors long before, sunlight was the light which controlled and directed all of our daily activity. During the day, we would be awake, active, hunting, foraging, and so on. And at night, we would naturally go into a state of rest, sleep, repair, and regeneration. For the most recent hundreds of millions of years of our biological evolution as primates, we primarily resided in the forest or jungle canopy, shielded from the open sky and from direct sunlight by dense vegetation, rich in chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the green pigment in plants which absorbs light from the sun and converts it into sugar, in other words, energy that the plant can use later on. And the range of light that chlorophyll primarily absorbs is in the visible and in particular the short wavelength spectrum of light. So when we talk about the light spectrum, we have two different ends. We have shorter wavelength light and longer wavelength light. Short wavelength light comprises of ultraviolet B, ultraviolet A, violet, as well as blue light, also known as HEVL, or high energy visible light. Longer wavelength light, on the other side of the spectrum, comprises of far infrared, near infrared, and then deep reds, which we see. The near and far infrared we don't see, but they contribute to other important processes in biology, which we'll get to in a bit. So in between, we have the rest of the visible colors: red, orange, yellow, blue, green, blue, indigo, violet, which you're familiar with. But it's important to know that there are wavelengths of light on the ends of the spectrum that we don't consciously perceive, but they reach us and they have significant biological effects. So under the forest canopy, where we spent the vast majority of our recent evolution as primates, hundreds of millions of years, we're exposed to an environment depleted in visible and in particular short wavelength light. Now, short wavelength light contains a significant amount of energy per photon. This is why it can cause a sunburn. This is why over time, excessive exposure to short wavelength light can cause things like skin aging, can even contribute to certain cancers of the skin, for example. So in this jungle or forest canopy environment, we're naturally protected from this stressful and harmful effect of this type of powerful light. It's sort of a natural shelter for our biology. There is a peak in green light, which is reflected or emitted by chlorophyll and green vegetation. And then as we get to the other side of the spectrum, there's what's called the near-infrared plateau, which is observed in the reflective properties of chlorophyll. Now, we don't see near-infrared, but research has shown that near-infrared wavelengths are the most biologically significant for energy production and antioxidant production, as well as water chemistry and water metabolism. So near-infrared light causes water to oscillate, and in doing so, it enhances cellular metabolism. In other words, when water oscillates inside of a cell and outside of cells, it supports the transfer of key nutrients and substrates and other materials relevant for biological reactions to move in and out of cells across membranes. It can help bring in the things we need and remove waste. So just through its action on water molecules, near-infrared actually enhances metabolism, metabolic processes at a deep cellular level, which has all sorts of positive effects on biological energy production, the vitality and health of an organism at large, and of course, downstream health implications. This is one of the main reasons why near-infrared has been implicated in so many great health benefits, as you've maybe heard of from red and near-infrared light therapy. Near-infrared also increases the production of cellular energy. So the powerhouse of the cell, called the mitochondria, has been shown to specifically absorb wavelengths of near-infrared light and increase energy production in response to this stimulus or this exposure. So without changing anything else, near-infrared actually increases cellular energy production at the mitochondrial level. When the organism and the cells have more energy to carry out vital processes, everything works better. The body's able to carry out everything it needs to. And so just as a rising tide lifts all ships, so too does increased cellular energy improve biological well-being across the board. Thirdly, near-infrared increases the production of cellular antioxidants. These include things like melatonin and glutathione and several others. By increasing the production of cellular antioxidants, near-infrared contributes to the neutralization and removal of harmful biological chemicals known as free radical molecules, which are the byproducts of the processes of normal metabolism, and they're designed to be cleared out through healthy levels of antioxidants, which are powered largely by near-infrared light exposure. So as we found ourselves for hundreds of millions of years in the jungle or forest canopy, we were bathed in green light, which is known to have balancing effects both from a psychological and physiological perspective, and near-infrared light, which has all of the benefits I've just described. Now, as time went on, humans began to move out of the jungle canopy. We developed one of the most robust systems for adapting to solar radiation exposure, in other words, to sunlight, because as I mentioned from early on, sunlight contains high proportions, especially under an open sky without the protection of the canopy, high proportions of short wavelength light, which can be damaging. This is why sunlight is toxic for bacteria and archaea, these simple-celled organisms which have no defense systems against this short wavelength light. It's also why most animals naturally avoid sun during the peak of the day, including humans. But humans uniquely adapted one of the most robust endocrine, that is, hormonal systems on the entire planet of any species. We lost our hair, and every single follicle on our entire skin has a key role in the production of hormones and other chemicals which allow us to adapt to solar radiation. Just to name a few examples that occur throughout the entire body when we go out under the open sky and we're exposed to sunlight. This blue light found in sunlight, which is kind of the proxy to our brain that the sun is bright and strong. You see, in the 1990s, researchers, particularly from the Iberian Peninsula, discovered that we have a unique pigment in our eye, a photoreceptor called melanopsin, which was previously found only in frog skin. So they were very surprised, what is this pigment doing in the human eye? It's contained in these cells called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, in other words, iPRGCs for short. And unlike the rods and the cones, which wire to the hindbrain and support the processes of image forming and vision consciously, these retinal ganglion cells wire directly to what's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, located in the hypothalamus, just a bit above and behind the eyes, which is the master regulator of metabolism in the entire body. And more specifically, the suprachiasmatic nucleus is the master clock for the entire brain and body. It's been shown that it sets the clock both in the brain and throughout all of the organs in their peripheral clocks. And every single cell in the body, in fact, has been shown to have clock genes. Nearly every gene begins with a clock gene. So we have these timekeeping systems throughout our entire body, which are directly influenced by the blue light passing through our eye from the sun. This initiates an entire cascade of effects. So as humans moved out under the open sky, what happens is we naturally increase the production of cortisol. Cortisol is called a glucocorticoid hormone. It's a stress hormone which helps to mobilize glucose, that is sugar, energy, into our bloodstream so that we can then use it for physical activity, whether hunting, foraging, migrating, or running from a predator, for example. We have mineral corticoids, and other stress hormones, which help to regulate our body's mineral and fluid balance, which is very important when we're exposed to hot sunlight, especially in a place like sub-Saharan Africa where humans evolved, because of course we lose tremendous amounts of fluid and minerals as we sweat under intense sunlight. Cortisol also helps to regulate and dampen inflammation throughout the body, which is essential because the sun's effects naturally increase inflammation to some extent in the body. So these are all different biological responses that we adapted in order to adapt to open sky sunlight exposure. But the key word is adapt. These are adaptations. In other words, they're not our default state, they're not our natural state, and they're not a state that we would want to stay in for an extended period of time. You see, the forest or the jungle canopy is a hormonally neutral environment. It's balancing. When we're in this environment, our body is not increasing the production of stress hormones for activity and response to sunlight, but also not increasing the production of melatonin, which is both a crucial antioxidant hormone, but also one which is responsible for reducing cellular energy production and putting us to sleep so that we can wind down and repair. So the jungle, the canopy, is a neutral environment from a hormonal perspective. It's a very important point. When we go out under the open sky, it's an activating environment. It's activating the endocrine system. The study of this is called photoendocrinology, how light, photo in Greek, activates the hormonal system, as well as activating the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is responsible for fight, flight, or hiding, for example, our response to stress and danger, including intense sunlight exposure at midday. So naturally, and we can observe this among human tribes as well as among all other sorts of animals, naturally we would not stay in this open sky, hormonally stimulating, sympathetic nervous system activating environment any longer than we need to. The migration out of the trees was very important for human evolution. It allowed us to hunt for larger prey. It allowed us to forage for a greater diversity of nutrients. It allowed us to migrate beyond the lands where we originally roamed. But besides periods of hunting, foraging, and migration, in general, we wouldn't actively stay under the open sky for extended periods of time without cause. Naturally, across all cultures and even different species, but within humans alone, we would seek shade. It's a very, very important point. We would seek hormonal neutrality and a state of balance, except in cases of survival or some survival-oriented objective. And then we had darkness at night. In darkness, when the sun goes down and we lose the stimulation of blue light from the sun and the activation of this sympathetic nervous system and endocrine system, the body naturally activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for resting and digesting. Naturally, the body and brain begin to release melatonin, which is essential, as I just shared, for helping us to wind down naturally and then going in and actually repairing ourselves from the natural damage that accumulates throughout the day in the normal processes of metabolism, energy production, and the removal of waste products. For hundreds of millions of years as primates, nighttime was essentially dead time. There was nothing to do. It wasn't safe to go out into the darkness, so we would naturally wind down and sleep. But around 1 million to 500,000 years ago, some pre-human hominids began to master the use of fire. There's a Greek legend telling the story of Prometheus, who allegedly stole fire from the gods and brought it to humankind, and for this he was tortured for all of eternity by being chained to a rock with a regenerating liver, which was eaten every single day by a bird before it regenerated again, and then it was eaten again. So this was the punishment for providing humans with the fire, which was previously only in the realm of the gods, of the divine. It's very symbolic. Evolutionary biologists and anthropologists alike generally agree that fire played a tremendous role in human evolution. It allowed for an increased extraction of nutrients from various food sources like starchy tubers, but also from meats and so on, to remove, for example, toxins and things that could otherwise prove fatal. And in this way, it very well may have contributed to the development of the human brain and the human species as distinct from some precursor hominids. Now, on the other hand, fire took this, as I called it, dead time in the evening, when it wasn't safe to go out into the open or out into the darkness away from the tribe, where we would just be together, but we couldn't see each other. We couldn't really do much. During the day, time was spent hunting, foraging, and doing other things, maybe searching for new terrain, things that could enhance and ensure our survival, but it wasn't safe to do those at night. So we would stay close. But there was nothing else that we could do. Fire unlocked this time. It allowed us to connect, to commune. Very few things feel more primitive, more human than sitting around a campfire or a bonfire with the ones we love. Even with strangers, we connect at a deep, deep soul level. So in many ways, fire turned us into a social species, the species that we are today. Homo sapiens, the one that knows. It was through these conversations and these ancient dialogues that so many of our modern myths and legends and stories began. So we have three primordial light environments as humans. We have the jungle or forest canopy, characterized by a significant depletion, more than 80% of visible light and short wavelength light in particular, with a peak reflection in the green range within the visible spectrum, visible light that we can see, and a much higher reflection in the near infrared range, outside of our scope of vision, but tremendously relevant for human biology for the reasons I described previously. In a similar way to the interplay between humans exhaling carbon dioxide and breathing in the oxygen that plants exhale, and plants inhaling the carbon dioxide that we exhale and breathing out the oxygen that we then inhale, it appears that we have a sort of symbiosis as well from a light perspective, where plants are reflecting these essential wavelengths for our biology, to which we ultimately adapted over those many, many years, hundreds of millions of them as primates in the canopy. And this environment is also characterized by being hormonally balancing and neutral, not bringing us up and not putting us down. Now, second, we have the open sky environment, the savanna, the desert, the steppe. This environment is characterized by a full spectrum with near equal proportion of short wavelength light and longer wavelength light, a significant quantity of ultraviolet A, ultraviolet B around the late morning onwards, as well as intense quantities of HEVL, high energy visible light, in the blue, indigo, and violet ranges. And still a significant proportion of near infrared, which has effects that offset to some extent the damage of short wavelength light. And this is a very, very important detail. It's actually been shown in vitro, in cells in a glass dish, exposed, tagged with a marker which shows the mitochondria and their healthy activity, exposed to just blue light, short wavelength light, and then exposed to this blue light with near infrared light, and also to near infrared alone as a control. The cells exposed purely to short wavelength light, to blue light, showed a significant degradation in mitochondrial energy production and cellular viability. In other words, this exposure to this more harmful, deleterious short wavelength light degraded the cell's capacity to function properly and to produce energy, ultimately leading to cell decline and death. The cells exposed to this blue light at the same time as near infrared showed significantly less decline compared to those exposed to the blue light only, and were almost indistinguishable from those exposed to the near infrared alone. In other words, near infrared offers a massive protective effect from short wavelength light at a cellular level, and this is approximately 40% of the wavelengths of light that make up sunlight. So in a way, there's still some degree of protection when we're exposed to the open sky, but the open sky, this short wavelength rich spectrum, is increasing It's activating the hormonal system. It's increasing the production of stress hormones, as I shared before. It's activating the sympathetic nervous system for surviving, for fighting, fleeing, hiding, and so on, for hunting, foraging, and migrating. And again, whenever we would have the chance, we would seek shade naturally. And now we have this third primordial light environment, characterized by fire and darkness. Now, fire is bright and it's hot, but fire has a extremely low proportion of short wavelength light, virtually none, and a tremendous amount of longer wavelength visible light, and especially near infrared and far infrared. Now, the far infrared we feel as heat. The near infrared we don't feel quite as much as heat, but it has all of these tremendous biological benefits. And then, of course, we have visible red, some yellow, and some orange. Very little blue, green, and so on. So fire has this, it's characterized by this very warm, orange, reddish, yellowish type spectrum. And this absence of short wavelength light means that even though we can see well with fire, it doesn't activate this hormonal system. In other words, it doesn't disrupt our body's natural clock and circadian rhythms, which are governed by the light of day, by sunlight. It doesn't emit the blue light, which signals the cells in the eye, the retinal ganglion cells and the melanopsin pigment contained therein, that the sun is out and that we should produce stress hormones and so on. So fire, as well as darkness, are naturally conducive of this parasympathetic state, this opportunity to wind down naturally, to rest, to rejuvenate, and to heal ourselves so that we can go on and do it again another day. And these are the light environments which we were confined to for a tremendous amount of time. The canopy, the open sky, and fire basically made up the vast majority of human evolution. Now, fire went beyond just the bonfires and the hearths of the olden days. It was used for cooking, eventually in the form of stoves. It was transformed into, for example, oil lamps and candles. Fire contributed to, in more ways than just sitting around a bonfire and sharing stories and the tribal elders speaking to the younger ones and celebrations and dancing in tribal times. Fire actually contributed massively to the development of modern civilization. A huge part of modern cities and civilization is the development of indoor spaces at some level of scale. And in order to have indoor spaces where people can continually function, you require some sort of lighting. And unless they were highly exposed to outside light, which often isn't the case in traditional buildings because the whole purpose of these shelters was to protect from the elements, which included sunlight and ultraviolet radiation. So fire was utilized as a way to illuminate indoor spaces in a more controlled manner. Fire was the first form of light that humans really came to control. As time went on, eventually cities even developed gas lamps, which were able to be powered by gas and kind of at a broader scale. So fire in many ways contributed to the development of modern cities. As streets were illuminated with brighter and brighter light, it became safer in cities. Commerce was enabled in the evenings. But fire had several issues. In spite of the fact that it was essentially hormonally neutral, supportive of natural evening rest and regeneration, not something that people back then were considering, it was just very practical. We need light to see. But it was sort of biologically harmonious and coherent with the environments within which our biology developed. But as I said, there were some issues with fire. Namely, it could burn down an entire city, and this happened more than once throughout history. Fire would go out of control, it would burn a neighborhood, it might even burn down the entire town, costing thousands of lives in the process and irreparable harm to everything and everyone. But it was the best option we had for the longest time. Fire also produced noxious fumes. People knew, before we called it carbon monoxide, people knew that being exposed to the fumes from fire was not a good thing for health on a long-term basis. Fire was also unpredictable. It kind of moved and wandered in a way. It was not exactly steady and stable, consistent light. It didn't all just turn on at once. You had to go and illuminate each lamp individually and put them each out individually. And it required a tremendous amount of fuel and maintenance, of course. had to constantly refuel the oil lamps and, get new candles and keep the gas supply flowing. So fire had issues, and by the early 1800s in the industrial world, or as the world was turning towards industrialization, it was kind of hitting a certain limit. Now, around this time, Alessandro Volta created the first viable photovoltaic cell, in other words, battery, or I should say, Alessandro Volta created the first voltaic cell, in other words, the first battery, which could utilize the power of electricity which had been discovered in previous centuries and decades. And as soon as electricity was captured by humanity, one of the first quests was to create electric lighting. Now, they created this carbon arc lamp, but it was extremely bright, it was unpleasant, and it was not something that was viable or functional for homes. But many entrepreneurs and engineers were working on this task for decades. And finally, in 1879, things really changed. Thomas Edison completed the first functional system with lamps, in other words, bulbs, sockets, wires, and all the like, in order to have a complete lighting system called the incandescent lamp. This was a tremendous revolution, and it was adopted globally very quickly. The incandescent lamp uses a tungsten filament which is electrified, and it incandesces. In other words, it gets very hot, it's glowing, and it emits some visible light, but also a tremendous amount of heat. And this is a very important point. The vast majority of electricity consumed by an incandescent lamp is released as far infrared, in other words, heat. A significant portion is also released as the biologically important and relevant near infrared, which we discussed. And then there's some visible light, but it's approximately 10% or so of the actual output of the lamp itself. The vast majority is emitted as near infrared and far infrared. But this was still a revolution. People weren't so concerned at that time about energy efficiency. They were amazed by the fact that they had a light source which they could easily and quickly turn on and off. It didn't produce smoke and soot. It didn't require constant resupplying of fuel. It wouldn't burn down an entire city. It was nothing really short of a miracle. And the first light bulb, the first incandescent bulb, is probably one of the most significant inventions in all of human history. It led essentially to the electrification of all cities. It really started with the desire to bring electric lighting into homes and buildings everywhere. Now, the incandescent lamp was the primary electric light source in homes and buildings for 6 decades, approximately. But in the early 1900s, people realized that these bulbs were quite inefficient. They wanted brighter light in factories and offices in particular to help increase brightness, to increase worker productivity, and so on and so forth. And yet, if you increase the amount of incandescent lighting, you significantly increased your energy costs, your electricity costs, but you also significantly increase the heating of the space because these far infrared wavelengths that I mentioned before heat the air. And a hot space makes it harder for people to focus and be productive. So there was a sort of cap that was reached. So development was ongoing for other light sources throughout this time. And finally, the fluorescent tubes, fluorescent lamps, were perfected. So fluorescent lamps basically inject electricity into mercury vapor, which turns it into a plasma temporarily. Basically, the electrons, and this is basic chemistry and physics, the electrons absorb this energy in the form of electricity, jump up to an excited state, but they can only hold it there for just a moment, and then they drop back down, and in the process, that energy has to go somewhere, and they release that energy as photons of light. And then there's a phosphor coating. Phosphor in Greek means light bearer. So there's a phosphor coating, that white coating around the fluorescent tube on the inside, which absorbs these photons, particularly ultraviolet photons. It absorbs the majority of them, not all, but the majority, and re-emits them as a more balanced, kind of broad spectrum of visible light. This was a significant step forward for lighting for offices and factories and other commercial spaces because it allowed significantly brighter light without heating the space and thereby affecting worker productivity at a significantly lower energy cost. They're 3 to 4 times more visible light output from a fluorescent bulb or tube compared to an incandescent bulb. So it was a no-brainer. And very quickly in the subsequent decades after the 1930s and 40s, fluorescent lighting became the standard in nearly all commercial and industrial spaces. But for homes, fluorescent tubes were overly bright, unpleasant, expensive, difficult to install, difficult to deal with, difficult to dispose of, and if they broke, they were quite dangerous because they contained mercury. So the incandescent bulb remained the light source, the primary light source in homes through the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s until everything changed. Now it's important to note that the incandescent bulb is very similar to fire in its light properties. It emits a very, very low relative proportion of short wavelength light, a bit more blue and green compared to fire, but still very little, virtually no violet or ultraviolet light, and a tremendous amount of near-infrared and far-infrared radiation. It follows what's called a black body radiation curve, the same light spectrum that is observed in fire, essentially. And this means that it is also essentially a hormonally neutral light source. It doesn't activate the hormonal system, it doesn't activate the sympathetic nervous system, the production of stress hormones, and so on and so forth. So incandescent lighting doesn't prevent our body's natural wind-down processes and essential cellular repair and sleep processes, which research has shown more and more in recent decades are essential for optimal health and disease prevention. But everything changed in the 1970s. The young state of Israel had decided to take the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and Egypt on Yom Kippur, a holy day in Judaism, decided to attack and take back the Sinai Peninsula. And this began what was called the Yom Kippur War. Now, the United States and its allies, supporters of Israel, came in and fought alongside it. And in response, OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, which included some of the largest players in the world like Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, as well as Venezuela, even outside of the Middle East, decided to embargo the United States and its Western allies from their oil supply, to which they had become very accustomed and played a significant role in the economic development of the West after World War II. So all of a sudden, a massive shockwave went through the West. The West had become accustomed to this relatively cheap and affordable oil, and all of a sudden oil prices were skyrocketing. In fact, there was gas rationing. People growing up at that time probably remember there were days when license plates with a certain number or letter at the end could get gas, and then other days when you couldn't and the other ones could. My scientific advisor, who was 10 years old at the time, told me he remembers when on Sundays they would go walking on the Autobahn. The famous highway in Germany where cars can go as fast as they want was completely empty in an effort to save gasoline and fuel. So it was a national crisis, and very quickly energy became a highly political subject, a matter of national security. But where things become interesting for our purposes is that lighting consumed approximately 20 to 30% of electricity in the average home and building. And so all of a sudden, when governments and politicians realize that their energy consumption can be sort of held hostage against them, it became a matter of national security to reduce electricity consumption, or at least to manage it as well as you could. And so lighting all of a sudden became a political target. Lighting, something which was confined purely to the realm of natural phenomenon for billions of years of evolution and to a form of technology for hundreds of thousands of years since the kind of capture of fire and the development of the incandescent bulb. All of a sudden, what was purely technological and natural became political, a matter of national security, in fact. And so began the push for more energy efficient lighting in homes. But it took time. It took a lot of time. It took a few decades until the development of compact fluorescent bulbs, these kind of tubular or kind of twirly bulbs, which everyone probably remembers. It became something that was commercially viable. Prior versions were bulky, too big. There were all sorts of issues with them. Too expensive. And this really was the beginning of the end from the perspective of lighting. In 2007, in a world post 9/11, amidst regional instability, again in the Middle East, the United States passed the Energy Independence and Security Act, which, among many other things, effectively banned incandescent light bulbs. It didn't explicitly ban them, it effectively banned them. In other words, it set the minimum requirement for light output per watt, in other words, lumens per watt, visible light output per watt of electricity consumed by a light bulb, by a general service lamp, had to meet a certain threshold. And these were based on what fluorescent lamps were capable of achieving, compact fluorescent lamps. And in doing so, incandescent bulbs were not able to meet these new standards by design. So in effecting this legislation, incandescent bulbs became effectively banned. And very quickly, manufacturers globally had to transition their production to compact fluorescents. The reason I say this was the beginning of the end is because the home, since the beginning of time, our place of shelter, was designed to be just that, a place of shelter, of rest, of reprieve from the external environment. First, it was the forest and the jungle canopy. As humans moved out under the open sky, we created our own shelters in order to have protection from the elements, of course from rain, from cold, from intense heat, but also from sunlight, intense solar radiation, including and especially short wavelength light like ultraviolet light, which in excess would have deleterious effects on biology, and people knew this throughout history. Now, of course, modern research has also shown that short wavelength light can be tremendously beneficial, and this is something that's a very contentious subject, but certain large organizations globally are advising that people avoid sunlight completely. And this is not what the scientific evidence supports either. There is actually a healthy middle ground between exposing ourselves to sunlight for the many benefits it offers and not sequestering ourselves completely indoors all the time and missing the natural signals and not getting the vitamin D we need, and exposing ourselves to excessive amounts of light. Both are undesirable, and there is, again, a place in the middle. But the home was a place of rest and regeneration since the beginning of time, essentially, governed by the forest canopy, firelight, and eventually incandescent lighting. It was a hormonally neutral environment where we could go, we could enter a state of the parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest, relaxation, healing, cellular repair, and sleep, all of which modern science have shown are absolutely essential, again, for the maintenance of health, well-being, homeostasis, and physiological balance. As soon as we introduce an element into the place which is designed and meant for rest and regeneration, we knock the body out of this balance, and we initiate the processes which lead to the development of diseases. What was a place where we would heal and restore becomes a place of continuing stress. In other words, burning the candle at both ends, not getting that time to rest, to heal, and to rejuvenate. This is exactly what the governments did by legally mandating the advent of compact fluorescent lighting into homes and the end of incandescent lighting in homes. Now the development went further. LEDs, light-emitting diodes based on solid-state semiconduction technology, similar to that in a computer chip, but manifested differently in a way. One controls switching of a transistor and logic, ones and zeros. Another emits light with that electricity. But LEDs had existed for some decades. For example, red indicator lights on a radio or on a car dashboard. They had red and yellow and green LEDs, but they hadn't been able to master the most difficult of them all, the blue LED. And this was a problem that faced physicists and confounded them for decades. But finally, in the 90s, 3 Japanese physicists cracked the code to produce the materials necessary to create consistent blue LEDs. It's called gallium nitride. And with the gallium nitride-based blue LED, we were finally capable of creating white light using LED technology. Now, LEDs from a lighting perspective, are miraculous. They use even less electricity than a fluorescent lamp and produce even more light output. And the industry, as well as regulators and governments, were all over it from the moment it started. They saw an even greater opportunity to reduce energy consumption while increasing brightness. Those interested in increasing worker productivity saw an opportunity to increase brightness and increase worker output while saving on their lighting costs and their electricity bills. Of course, for buildings which might require significant amounts of air conditioning, these cold light sources with no heat production were also highly desirable. They reduce the amount of air conditioning required and thereby the amount of electricity. So combining the political climate post 9/11 and regional instability in the Middle East, concern about energy shocks, with the ever-evolving interest in the climate, green agendas, and so on and so forth, which had been springing up from the 90s into the 2000s, the LED was nothing shy of the pinnacle of lighting development. And it truly is an amazing technology. But it came with several key issues which we've actually solved, and that's what I'm going to be telling you about a little bit more today. The first issue of standard LEDs is that they emit a significant amount of blue light, excessive blue light. So traditional conventional LEDs are constantly activating this sympathetic photoendocrine response to light that I taught you about earlier. They're constantly jacking up the production of stress hormones and thereby stress in the body. Now, if we're going out under an open sky and we're going to be exposed to intense solar radiation, we're going to be hunting, foraging, fishing, migrating, and so on, this cortisol to move sugar into our muscles is tremendously beneficial, desirable, and necessary. But if we're sitting at a desk, this stimulus could become highly unproductive and undesirable. We don't need more glucose, more sugar, more energy in our muscles when we're sitting around just using our head. Yeah, we need some sugar for our brain, but not as much as when we're out physically active. We don't need the production of the other stress hormones to regulate fluid balance and mineral balance in anywhere near the same way. Not really at all. And yet some people in the lighting industry, and this has only been furthered by a concept called human-centric lighting, which is not human-centric at all, make no mistake, have believed that it is desirable to increase the quantity of blue light in an indoor environment during the day. You can call them full spectrum bulbs, human-centric lighting, what have you. And they're not full spectrum, we'll get to that a bit later on, the ones that claim to be. We, at my company, Raw Optics, fundamentally disagree with and reject this. It's not based on science, and in fact, it poses significant harm to the people exposed to this light. Maybe some people, younger, healthier people, could benefit from some degree of this blue light photoendocrine stimulation throughout the day. Some in limited doses, some maybe in greater doses. But for example, someone with a medical contraindication like high blood pressure, chronic stress, and other stress-related conditions absolutely will not benefit from an increase in the stimulation of their stress and hormonal system constantly throughout the day on an ongoing basis, as if they were under the open blue sky, one of those three primordial environments we spoke about earlier on, which we're not designed to be exposed to on a permanent, ongoing basis. This began with the bringing in of fluorescent tubes, with the introduction of fluorescent tubes into indoor offices and commercial spaces and factories, into indoor offices, factories, and other commercial spaces in the 40s, but at least it was confined just to these spaces during daytime, or for those who are active and working at night, which is also a chronobiological mismatch and is not ideal. But the home was still a place of safety, regeneration, parasympathetic activation, rest, repair, sleep, and so on, until the shift to the compact fluorescent bulb, which was quickly followed by the mandatory, essentially, rollout of LEDs subsequently. So contrary to the industry and human-centric lighting perspective that more blue light is constantly a good thing, we actually believe it can present medical. In fact, it is essentially a medical treatment because it's acting on biological systems producing very significant biological outcomes. And anything that falls in these categories is normally treated as a medical intervention, which requires some sort of proper approval procedures by governments and regulatory bodies. But human-centric lighting and modern lighting followed none of these criteria. Modern lighting was optimized for one thing and one thing only: lumens per watt. In other words, brightness and efficiency. Not lighting quality, not from the perspective of beauty and the way things appear and the experience on the eyes, and absolutely not for biological health. We can't fault them, these regulators and those responsible in the industry, because they probably didn't know, to be honest. The tremendous body of research of the impacts that light has on health really became more and more robust starting in the 90s and only has begun to reach general mainstream awareness in just the past few years. It's evolving very rapidly. It's a very alive space right now in science, as well as in health and wellness communities and so on. There's been great interest in these topics, which is why we're here. But anyway, the first problem of modern standard LEDs is excessive blue light, short wavelength light, which has this effect of stimulating the sympathetic nervous system and activating the hormonal system. Another effect is that it's directly harmful for eye health. So the next shortcoming of conventional LEDs is the lack of near-infrared light, which I mentioned earlier provides a protective benefit against this short wavelength light. So the excessive blue light is only exacerbated significantly by the absence, complete and total absence, of healing, regenerative, near-infrared wavelengths of light, which exacerbates what I was getting at, which is the physical damage that these blue-enriched light sources have on both the sensitive, exposed retinal tissue as well as the skin. Now, again, near-infrared was omitted from these modern light sources. Why? Because it doesn't contribute to lumens per watt. It doesn't contribute to any degree of visible brightness. You can't see it, and therefore it's not incentivized. And it's very possible that those pushing this forward were completely unaware of the essential role that near-infrared light plays and has always played in various light sources: visual health, eye health, skin health, cellular health. Recent studies have shown that near-infrared light actually can penetrate through the entire torso. In other words, it goes far beyond skin deep, and it has systemic benefits on energy production, antioxidant production, and so on and so forth. Some of the subjects which I discussed just at the beginning here. So, conventional LEDs contain and emit excessive quantities of blue light, harmful for this stress and hormonal system, or responsible for chronic overstimulation, as well as posing a significant threat to eye health and more. Total deficiency of the healing and regenerative near-infrared wavelengths of light. The beneficial and regenerative near-infrared wavelengths of light. Third, due to the low-quality spectrum, which is again focused on maximum brightness and efficiency, conventional LEDs have extremely low color rendering. Just as a reference, sunlight, fire, and the incandescent bulb all have a CRI, color rendering index, of 100 or just shy of it. LEDs have accepted a color rendering index of just barely above 80 in many cases. Now, color rendering is how well any given light source approximates sunlight. In other words, if you have a beautiful oil painting, you can see all of the colors in that painting when it's exposed to sunlight or a high color rendering light source. But if you put it under, for example, a red light, you'd only be able to see the red and 50 shades of white, black, and gray, because there's no other spectral colors to be absorbed and then re-emitted by the other pigments. And so when we're under low CRI lighting, people and objects appear pale, dull, sickly, and lifeless. And this is the direct effect of having a highly deficient, low quality, energy and efficiency optimized light spectrum, so low color rendering index. The fourth issue with conventional LED lighting today is that it has an extremely high amount of flicker. Now, flicker is when the light literally flickers on and off, but it occurs at a level which is below visible conscious perception. So you don't necessarily see it, but it's still there. Sometimes people can observe it if they put their phone on a slow motion camera mode and then direct it towards the light source. Then you can maybe see this flicker, but it's there regardless. And it's the result of the alternating AC current power grid on which our entire electrical system is based, and essentially low quality or just cheap circuitry which is not designed to provide a more constant current to these LEDs, thereby filtering out this flicker. So basically the modulation, the flicker on the power grid is directly carried over into the light sources. And again, from the perspective of the cheapest, most efficient, highest brightness, but lowest quality light, why would you spend extra money to invest in circuitry to filter out flicker? You wouldn't, and the industry hasn't. But the research has shown that flicker can contribute to migraine headaches. It can cause some degree of disruption to the nervous system, also affecting focus, learning, productivity, and so on. So the flicker effect is very real. Light shouldn't be flickering. It's one thing to flicker kind of gently like fire does, but for example, 100 or 120 times per second, depending on the power grid, is not natural or biologically ideal. In fact, the evidence has shown it's quite problematic. So fourth major issue of conventional LEDs is that they flicker tremendously. And the fifth major issue with conventional LEDs is excessive brightness. So I've referred to this numerous times now throughout this discussion. But as they are optimized for brightness, they're not optimized for a pleasant experience or for your visual comfort. So this excessive brightness can be most easily witnessed when you look at an LED replacement of the old Edison incandescent bulbs. You know, the ones with the beautiful visible filament which glows kind of warm, which you'd see kind of strung on a black electrical wire with the sockets along it, this kind of string lights out in a garden or a courtyard or even in a restaurant, for example. These Edison filament bulbs, which were replaced with LEDs, are often so excessively bright that it's unpleasant. Now, you wouldn't necessarily notice unless you have a reference, but some restaurants you can see they have some of the old ones and some of the new ones. You can see just how unpleasant and irritating the overly bright LED replacements are compared to the old school traditional tungsten filament incandescents. So that's the final major issue with standard LEDs. And what are the effects of this? What does this actually mean for you? Well, this excess blue light, again, is harmful for the eyes as well as for the skin. It's also chronically overstimulating your stress system, which means you have increased levels of stress. It's harder to stay in a state of balance and peace and ease. It affects your mental health. In fact, the largest study ever conducted on light and mental health came out of Australia, showing over 85,000 participants. It showed that those people exposed to excessive artificial light at night and not enough natural bright light during the day had the highest incidence of mental illness of any one study. Those with the lowest mental illness, we're talking anxiety, depression, PTSD, and more, were those who exposed themselves to natural bright daylight during the day and had the most amount of darkness at night. In other words, maximizing the two amplitudes, the two phases of the circadian rhythm. Bright natural light during the day and darkness at night. If you flip that, it increases the risk of effectively every mental illness, or the incidence, not just the risk, and so many other biological negative effects. So excessive blue light is disrupting sleep, energy, and health, and chronic sleep disruption, as we've discussed, literally has been shown by the research to increase the incidence of nearly every disease, also destroying your focus, your productivity, your ability to complete all the things you want to do. So that's one of the main effects. Constant stress, eye damage, again, seeing people and objects in low color quality and not being able to see the true colors available in life. Chronic sleep disruption, the inability to wind down naturally in the evening, and just kind of a general unpleasant experience of the world. At night, you're not able to relax in the way that you once did, or if you're from a younger generation, you may not even know what true relaxation and parasympathetic nervous system activation even feels like. These are really the main issues of modern standard LEDs. They have a significant consequence on our ability to both think clearly, to feel our best, to sleep properly and repair, and to experience a normal, peaceful, balanced life, because we've brought the stressful open sky into our everyday environments for nothing more than the goal of maximum brightness and efficiency without any regard for lighting quality and human health. The good news is we have a solution: LUMIOS. If you're like most people, you probably don't like LED lighting, and you also probably don't know why. Well, LED lighting has all sorts of issues, the first of which is that it's optimized for efficiency and brightness, not for lighting quality, and definitely not for human well-being. LEDs came into play after the banning of the incandescent bulb, temporarily replaced by compact fluorescents, and then finally LEDs. They took over because they produced the greatest amount of light output per unit of electricity, lumens per watt. All the governments and regulatory agencies became massively focused on energy efficiency as the main goal for lighting, simply as part of the green agendas and saving the environment and so on. But the people responsible for this weren't aware, or completely missed, that light plays an essential role not just in our experience of the world, but also in our health and well-being. You see, for billions of years we lived in nature where light governed the body clock, also known as circadian rhythms. In the morning, natural sunlight wakes us up, activates all of these processes, including our metabolism, energy production, key hormones, and neurotransmitters. And then in the evening, the sun sets. Our brain registers that it's nighttime. It's time to begin releasing melatonin and winding down for sleep and cellular repair, which is essential for optimal performance the next day, for optimal health and well-being, and for the prevention of disease generation. Now we live in this modern world where we hardly ever get outside to see the sunrise and to get light throughout the day, natural, bright, full-spectrum daylight, and we are constantly bombarded by huge quantities of artificial light at night. Now this is basically disrupting our circadian rhythm, disrupting our body's hormones, neurotransmitters, metabolism, weight management, energy production, and so much more, and ultimately leading to negative health outcomes. It's also been linked to mental health conditions and so on. Just scrolling on our phones late at night is actually disrupting our sleep quality, our energy levels, our health, our mood, our well-being, our performance, and our productivity. What's the solution? Well, LEDs by themselves aren't completely bad. It's just that LED technology has been focused on optimizing for nothing but brightness and efficiency. Everything's changed now. At Raw Optics, we spent the last 5 years developing a light bulb based on LED technology that works in the modern world. It's far more efficient than the old incandescent bulbs, but not at the expense of lighting quality and human biology. We've created a light bulb which solves all of the main issues of conventional LEDs, and it's called LUMIOS. I have it right here. LUMIOS addresses the excessive blue light of standard LEDs by optimizing blue light in a very targeted manner, significantly reducing it, and even having multimodal options, different modes for evening with zero blue light. So your body can get into a rest and regenerative state when it's the right time of day. We've addressed the complete absence of near-infrared in modern efficient lighting. They've removed these healing and essential wavelengths for our cells because they don't contribute to visible brightness. We've added them back so that you can get all of the benefits for eye health, skin health, cellular energy, and antioxidant production, which have been proven to be the result of exposure to near-infrared light, which was always present in the sun, in fire, and even the old incandescent bulbs. We've created a beautiful broad spectrum which offers ultra-high color rendering similar to sunlight, fire, and incandescent bulbs, which means you can see people and objects in their true, lifelike, natural colors rather than the pale, dull, lifeless energy of standard cold and warm white LEDs and fluorescent light sources in the modern world. We've invested in high-quality circuitry to actually flicker out the alternating current from the electrical power grid, which causes tremendous flicker on standard LED lights, which you can see on your phone through your slow-motion camera, but also contributes to migraine headaches, visual disturbances, and even negatively affects focus, cognition, and productivity, according to scientific research. We've innovated a multimodal design for these light bulbs, which allows you to have different modes for different times of day. So a little bit more white light for daytime and much warmer light like candles for the evening. So you can have light that allows you to see everything during the day, and then the minimal amount of brightness and the lowest, even total absence of blue light in the evening, so that you can wind down naturally, register, so that your brain can register that it's dark outside and that the sun has set. It can begin to release melatonin so that you can wind down naturally, fall asleep easily, sleep deeply, get the rest, rejuvenation, and cellular repair and recovery that you need in order to wake up the next day feeling refreshed, ready to perform, and ready to succeed in whatever you're doing. This is LUMIOS. It is the world's first human-friendly LED. Now, before I tell you about LUMIOS, I want to talk a little bit about some of the attempts that have been made to create more human-friendly lighting in recent years, which ultimately have missed the mark. I already shared to a good degree of detail about human-centric lighting, which is more of a mainstream concept which has been adopted in schools, workplaces, and other public spaces, as well as in private home spaces, in an attempt to strengthen or support the body's circadian rhythm by significantly increasing the color temperature of artificial light sources, in other words, the content of blue light, in order to stimulate these retinal ganglion cells and the melanopsin pigment in them during the day, with the idea that this is beneficial to the body. Now, for brief intermittent exposure, which one of the modes on one of our products that I'm going to show you offers, this can be highly beneficial and useful. However, as I shared that our primordial natural state for the last hundreds of millions of years of primate evolution is that of the jungle forest canopy, which creates a hormonally neutral, balancing environment, and that going out under the open sky is stimulating a energy consuming and demanding adaptation, a biological adaptation, which is not meant to be sustained for an extended period of time. At Raw Optics, my company, we fundamentally reject and disagree with, based on the available evidence, the idea that it is somehow beneficial to constantly stimulate and activate this sympathetic dominant stress hormone-based system using excessive quantities of blue light. And not only this, while it may be beneficial for some individuals, there is no way to safely say that it would be beneficial for everyone, especially those with contraindications, again, such as high blood pressure or chronic stress, which a huge number of individuals in the modern world deal with on a regular basis. We've already discussed how the concept of human-centric lighting is not human-friendly, and beyond the hormonal and nervous system impacts, it also has significant potential to cause damage to the eyes, because by increasing the content of short wavelength hormonally stimulating light, these products do not carefully distinguish between the blue light, which is activating the circadian rhythm, and the melanopsin pigment in the eyes and the retinal ganglion cells, with a peak absorption of around 480 nanometers, and the shorter wavelength blue light below 450 nanometers, which has more potential to cause physical harm. We can divide the blue light spectrum into two parts. Above 450 nanometers is responsible for stimulating and activating the hormonal, the endocrine system, and thereby affecting all of these downstream processes in the body via the circadian rhythm, including metabolic health, disease prevention or regeneration, sleeping and waking cycles, and so on and so forth. Below 450 nanometers, down to around 400, it's still blue light, but it's more in the high energy visible light spectrum, blue, indigo, and violet, and then ultraviolet beyond that. This is the portion of blue light which doesn't have a significant effect on the endocrine and hormonal system, but absolutely contributes to retinal harm. Now, a lot of these light sources base their safety on what is called the phakic blue light hazard curve. Phakic comes from the Greek word meaning lens, because our eye has a lens which, as we age, naturally becomes cloudy, protecting us to some extent from short wavelength light. Young children, as well as people who have had intraocular lens surgery to remove cataracts, so a lens which became overly cloudy to the point where their vision was significantly limited, do not have the same degree of protection of someone with a fully developed lens, which occurs around the age of 20 to 25 years old in most humans. So then, as a result, their retina, the macula, is far more exposed to the harms of this short wavelength light. So at Raw Optics, our premise is based on maximum safety and the precautionary principle, which means that we develop our products based on the aphakic curve, assuming that there is not a fully developed lens in the eye, or that it's been removed post-cataract surgery and maybe not replaced with a blue light filtering lens, as more than 50% of lenses post-cataract surgery are not designed to filter blue light at a significant amount. And therefore, again, we use what's called the aphakic curve when developing our products. So we minimize the proportion of short wavelength light below 450 nanometers. In general, LUMIOS, which I'm going to show you, has a very low proportion of blue light. But there's one mode, we call it sky mode, designed to strengthen and support the circadian rhythm, but only for brief intermittent use, about 10 to 15 minutes, not the entire day, and not across everyone without discrimination for individual characteristics and biological traits. So human-centric lighting poses two major threats. One, hormonal overstimulation on a chronic basis, simulating the open sky environment, which we are not meant to be exposed to on an ongoing basis permanently without rest and reprieve, back to our neutral environment of the jungle or forest canopy-like environment. Our homes are meant to be places of peace, of rest, of effectively shade, not chronic additional stimulation, which leads people to feel stressed, but also has downstream health consequences. The second issue, as I mentioned, is the threat to the eyes, as well as skin, but the eyes are particularly sensitive and exposed. So now that brings us to two major attempts by health and wellness enthusiasts to create better lighting options for homes and so on. The first is called full spectrum lighting. And in fact, it's a misnomer because it's not full spectrum at all. But what they've done is instead of using blue pump-based LEDs, they've used violet pump LEDs, which basically create what appears to be a more broad spectrum, especially in the short wavelength light range, between approximately 380 and especially starting at 400 nanometers in most cases, up to 500. So removing this larger blue spike around 455 nanometers, which we see in blue pump-based LEDs, and replacing it with a more continuous light output throughout the blue, indigo, and violet range. Now, for the reasons I've described, if you consider the blue light hazard from the perspective of the aphakic blue light hazard curve, assuming no lens or a minimally developed lens, in particular in the case of children, because we're interested in protecting and preserving the eye health of children, as well as everyone. But children are far more sensitive because they don't have a developed lens, so their macula and retina are far more exposed. This is possibly the worst idea which has ever been created in lighting, because it's exposing young children and those with lenses removed, as well as everyone else, to a high dose of more damaging short wavelength light in indoor environments on a chronic basis when, as I've described in great length at this point, we are not designed or meant to be exposed to the elements, the full elements, and the more harmful elements of nature, including short wavelength light from the sun, on an ongoing basis. It is like saying that the logic follows the same logic as if we were to say, well, it rains in nature. It rains a lot outside, so we should bring rain machines into our homes and have sprinklers watering down on us. Just because it happens outside, we should bring it inside. This is the same degree of logic generally applied to full spectrum lighting. There are also some claims that there are certain photoreceptors in the eye, namely neuropsin, which absorbs ultraviolet light, but there's no substantial evidence that this contributes to any effects systemically throughout the body beyond local effects. The perspective of Dr. Alexander Wunsch, the world's leading holistic integrative photobiologist, who is our scientific advisor at Raw Optics, is that this particular photoreceptor is much more like a warning button. In other words, just because there's an alarm button or something like this doesn't mean you should be pressing it constantly. And this conflicts massively with some of the health enthusiasts who have taken some limited available science and said we should get as much sun as we can. We should get unlimited sun, practically, which is a topic I touched on earlier. There's a fine balance between saying we should get as much sun as we possibly can all the time and that there's no risk to that, or saying, for example, on the other hand, that sunlight is a carcinogen and we should completely avoid sunlight and always wear sunglasses and sunscreen, neither of which are actually true. The truth lies somewhere in the middle here. Now, the other major issue with full spectrum bulbs, besides the enrichment of short wavelength, especially violet light, which poses a tremendous risk to eye health as well as skin health, is that they're completely deficient in near infrared. So while they claim to be full spectrum, they're actually enriching the more harmful short wavelength part of the spectrum while still being completely depleted in the longer wavelength portion of the spectrum, the near infrared. And of course, this is because they didn't have the technology that we've now developed in order to produce this near infrared using advanced phosphors in LED chips. But anyway, they're completely deficient in the wavelengths, which, if you recall earlier, I described the research which has been done showing cells exposed to blue light, short wavelength light, without the protective near infrared, and the tremendous increase in the speed of cellular damage and degradation, especially in mitochondria, in the energy production centers of the cells, which occurs when these cells and organelles are exposed to this light without the protective and beneficial near infrared. And this is something that people have caught on to and purchased, huge quantities of these bulbs to retrofit their entire homes, and it has become a phenomenon all around the world, which is ultimately tremendously misguided based on a lack of understanding of light and the true risks of blue and violet enriched light, especially while being completely near infrared deficient. Now, this is a big statement and a big shift for the wellness lighting industry, but it's one that has to be made and shared because ultimately people are putting themselves at a tremendous degree of short and especially long-term risk by exposing themselves to this violet enriched light on a regular basis, especially without near infrared wavelengths in these light sources, which none of them currently on the market have. So if you've purchased full spectrum light bulbs, my apologies on behalf of those who didn't know any better. The full spectrum light bulbs do reduce the generally they reduce the hormonally stimulating wavelengths of light, but not enough in a way that makes them hormonally neutral like the forest and jungle canopy or like an incandescent light bulb, which is another major issue. So beyond the most serious, gravest risk of the physical damage to the eye and then also some kind of peripheral effects on the skin as well, there is this hormonal stimulation issue which is still present in these full spectrum bulbs, just as it is in human-centric lighting, just as it is in conventional LED lighting. On the other hand, you have these kind of these red, orange, or yellow kind of biohacking light bulbs for night. Now, the good news about these is that they've removed blue light. So at least you don't have the greatest offender for circadian rhythm, sleep, and cellular repair in the evening. However, they've taken out the blue, but they haven't necessarily created high quality, better light. In fact, they haven't. First of all, most of these light bulbs have extremely low or virtually zero color rendering. So they still fall into kind of the same realm, or even worse, of standard conventional LEDs, where people and objects appear pale, dull, and lifeless, except when it's a kind of red coated or just red LED based bulb, yellow or orange, which are the types of products currently floating around on the wellness market. You don't just see things in kind of pale and dull color, you see them in basically monochrome color. You just see people as red, and again, you might see sort of 50 shades of gray and black and white. Because when you don't have the rest of the spectrum, as I explained before, you can't see the other spectral colors. You can't see the blush in someone's cheeks. You can't see things in a normal way. So everything feels awkward. I've been to friends' houses where they're lit with this yellow or red lighting, and it is tremendously unpleasant. So just because we remove blue light doesn't mean we've actually made progress towards creating better high-quality light, which is actually pleasant to live under on a daily basis. Again, I've been in these environments and it's tremendously unpleasant. I could never have these kinds of light sources in my home, which is why we've created something far better. Now, with that, these light sources are generally also far too bright and often cannot be dimmed. So I've been in the houses of friends who had their entire home retrofitted with bulbs from various companies in the wellness space, some which even have multiple modes, and the evening mode is unpleasant and just excessively bright. Again, another major issue from conventional LEDs. They still have extremely low color rendering and they're excessively bright. So this is really the state of affairs with these kind of nighttime wellness / biohacker bulbs. They don't really look good. They're not really good quality lighting. In fact, they're very bad quality lighting. They're overly bright. And then some of them haven't even filtered out flicker, and so on and so forth. And by the way, virtually none of them emit any near infrared. So again, the most healing, regenerative, essential wavelengths for cellular health, eye health, skin health, and energy production and antioxidant production based on what the scientific evidence is saying throughout the entire organism, throughout the body, they're completely deficient in these wavelengths. So they truly haven't created better light, and that's a very unfortunate state of affairs, which so many people who have purchased these products are currently living with. But until just today, there really was no better option, unless you were able to get your hands on incandescent bulbs, which until now have been the best light source. But even incandescent bulbs have a bit of flicker. In order to have a perfect incandescent light spectrum with no flicker, you need a 12 volt. It needs to be run on a certain type of driver and so on and so forth to completely eliminate flicker and create this perfect light. And even still, it produces a tremendous amount of heat, which may be undesirable. So, and additionally, it doesn't have the flexibility, the ability to change the light source in the ways that we're able to with LED technology, which is far more advanced from a technological perspective and functional in many ways. And that brings me finally to LUMIOS. So before I introduce LUMIOS, I just want to tell you a short bit about myself and my company, because I haven't done that yet. My name is Matt Maruca. I'm the founder of Ra Optics. Ra is the Egyptian god of light, specifically sunlight, also associated with health, vitality, abundance, and so on, all the things which the sun was traditionally associated with. Optics is the science responsible for the genesis, the propagation of, and the absorption, reflection, in other words, the interaction with matter of light. So the science responsible for studying essentially light and all of its properties. So Ra Optics really just means sunlight. Now, we've existed for 8.5 years, since late 2017, with the mission and the deep belief that I personally hold, and my entire team and our company and our customers hold, that within all of us lives greatness. There is a great power, some kind of unlimited spark that I truly believe we all have within us that wants to come out. In fact, it's dying to come out. It's screaming for us. And this is, I think, the energy we feel when we know we have more to give to the world. We know that we can do better. We know that we could level ourselves up. And there's this kind of internal challenge, which is written about in so many great books and stories throughout history. It is kind of the human experience between kind of moving up or moving down. And we firmly believe, and I had a personal experience as a kid where I dealt with chronic gut issues, allergies, and headaches. I tried basically everything. I tried Western medicine. They prescribed me all these drugs, naturopathic medicine. I tried all these diets and supplements, workout programs, and so much more, ultimately struggling to reach the root cause. And when I learned about light, it changed everything for me, because it gave me a much deeper perspective through which to understand biology, that our mitochondria, responsible for processing the food and the nutrition we consume, are ultimately controlled by light. And if our light environment is disrupted, and we have this chronic circadian rhythm disruption because of lack of natural light during the day and excessive artificial light at night, then our mitochondria aren't able to function properly and optimally. They're not able to carry out the process of energy production in the optimal way during the day. And they're not able to carry out the processes of repair and regeneration and healing in the evening. This is the direct effect of circadian rhythm disruption and excessive artificial light at night and not enough natural light during the day, and chronic overstimulation from harmful light sources during the day as well. There's all sorts of downstream effects, which we've discussed at length. So when I learned about this and I started going outside and getting morning sunlight to help set my body's rhythm, and I learned about these blue light blocking glasses, which have been our main product now for the last 8.5 years. I started wearing them, and they completely changed my life. They made it so much easier for me to wind down and relax naturally. Now, I did not think I would ever end up running a company selling glasses, but inevitably when they were working for me and there was a demand among the community, and I saw it and I had read a few books about startups, I realized, well, if I want to have my own company, I'd better look at what the people in this community are asking for and see. And there was a clear demand for a higher quality product, which was actually stylish and attractive and enjoyable to wear in public, not like these bulky safety goggles, which also blocked the right wavelengths based on the scientific evidence. And there was no product that did that. Ra Optics was the first truly functional blue light protection or blue light filtering eyewear, which both blocked the right wavelengths based on what the science was saying and was combining that with high quality, attractive, stylish, durable frames. Now, due to our commitment to science and quality, which is unwavering, Our products have been adopted by some of the greatest minds, the greatest athletes, the greatest leaders all around the world in these decades. We've seen the likes of Rick Rubin, the iconic music producer, Erling Haaland, one of the greatest football strikers currently living, and even Novak Djokovic, considered widely the greatest tennis player of all time, wearing raw optics on a regular basis. So we're very proud of this. Among many others, many other professional athletes and leaders in the health and wellness world as well. We've even been complimented by some of the greatest people in the health and wellness world who were using our products as customers and then ultimately went to kind of spin them off and create their own brand. And honestly, we're happy to have support on this mission because we can't do it all alone. Some years into the journey, I began working with someone who I had known since before I even started the company. His name is Dr. Alexander Wunsch. He's an MD and a PhD from Germany who has dedicated his entire life to understanding and applying the science of light and color in order to help patients and people to experience a better quality of life and even to treat illness. So I approached Dr. Wunsch because I wanted to have, bar none, the highest quality, most effective blue light protection lenses in the world, and we've been working with him now consistently for over the past 4 years. And when I approached him, not only were we improving our lens technology to continue to be the best in the world and continue to step up as others try to follow and do the same, it became very clear what I had already felt since many years prior, which is that we needed to address the root cause. We needed to solve the light itself. And so that's what we've been working on for the last several years. We've worked carefully and diligently over these years to translate Dr. Wunsch's decades of experience, including his PhD research on light therapy, into a product which you can actually bring into your daily life and experience the benefits of the science of life. And ultimately, to conclude about my company, Raw Optics, and my own personal experience, I firmly believe, as does Dr. Wunsch, that light really matters. It is a tremendously powerful tool which we can use to transform lives. And if we transform enough lives, if we can help to transform just you, it will change your world, and ultimately, we believe that we can have a really powerful impact on the world at large. You know, there's so much strife and conflict and fighting today, and yet it doesn't have to be this way. And when the scientific evidence is clearly pointing to light as one of the most significant factors in mental, psychological, as well as physical health and well-being, and we're all practically living in a way which is so disconnected from our natural state of being, from this state of balance and ease and peace, which is our natural state. It's no wonder that we're seeing a lot of the things that are happening in the world today. And we truly believe that by helping people to live under better light, we can all make the world a better place. So, without further ado, I would like to tell you more about LUMIOS. LUMIOS is the world's first human-friendly LED. And we chose that word human-friendly very specifically because it's not human-centric and we don't want to be associated with this misdirected movement. It's human-friendly. It just feels good. So LUMIOS is based on solving all of the major issues of conventional LEDs, not filtering bad light, not a half solution, but creating better light truly from the ground up. LUMIOS addresses the excessive quantities of blue light emitted by conventional LEDs by using advanced phosphor technology, which absorbs this blue light, converting it into a broader, longer wavelength spectrum, including deep reds and near infrareds, which leads directly to the next two advancements in LUMIOS, which are near infrared enhanced lighting, as well as an ultra-high color rendering index, ultra-high CRI. So the reduction in blue light, of course, relieves the stress and the physical damage to the eyes, which we've discussed, supporting the reduction of eye strain, headaches, and fatigue, and so on, but also reducing this chronic hormonal overstimulation. In other words, rather than simulating the open sky landscape and this sympathetic activation and stress-based activation, LUMIOS brings you from a hormonal perspective back into the forest canopy, back to incandescent lighting, back to a a world in which we lived in a hormonally neutral environment in our indoor spaces when we weren't out hunting, fighting, fleeing, foraging, hiding, migrating, and so on, all the other activities associated with survival. LUMIOS brings us back to this time, to this environment of balance. Secondly, with this advanced technology, which by the way we call the raw incandescent LED, it is a revolution in LED technology which allows LUMIOS to have all of these powerful features. This enrichment in near infrared, it's a tremendous amount of near infrared. Some products in the wellness space have attempted to add near infrared. We've measured them, it's virtually undetectable. But this tremendous output of near infrared using this advanced raw incandescent LED technology has all of the benefits which I've discussed before, supporting eye health, skin health, cellular health, including throughout the entire body based on the recent groundbreaking research of Dr. Glenn Jeffrey of the University College of London, that this near-infrared goes all the way through our entire torso and supports metabolism and cellular health and well-being and antioxidant production and energy production and so much more. So near-infrared light, like a rising tide lifts all ships, supports every process in the body systematically, and this means more energy for you, increased well-being, a greater state of energy and balance. Ultra-high color rendering index, particularly on the daylight mode of 2 of the LUMIOS bulbs, which we'll get to, as well as the evening mode of 1 of the bulbs, is a massive advancement in LED technology. It is literally the highest quality lighting ever produced with an LED. When we connected with the technologists in Asia who had been working on this, their primary intention was to create higher quality lighting from a visual standpoint, rejecting the direction of the industry that light should just be focused on efficiency and brightness. And we realized, myself and Dr. Alexander Wunsch, that there's so much more to that. It goes so far beyond lighting quality just from a visual standpoint, but it also has a tremendous impact from a biological standpoint. The two are essentially one and the same. They cannot be separated. And that's the origin of the raw incandescent LED and LUMIOS technology. So this is the highest quality, most beautiful light ever produced with an LED, and we do believe that it will be rapidly and widely adopted across the entire world, maybe just for this reason alone, separate from the biological benefits. But this ultra-high color rendering means that finally, after essentially decades of a kind of pseudo-darkness that we've lived in, you can see people, most importantly, but also objects in your home, anywhere you go. Indoor spaces, of course, because the sun has the perfect color rendering, but you can see objects in indoor spaces in their natural, lifelike, true colors. And this is really important, both for personal self-esteem, the way you see yourself, for social interaction, for connecting with others at a deeper level because of all the things we pick on, from the blush of the cheeks to the color of the lips, and so much more, which is only visible under high color rendering light sources. So ultra high color rendering is the third major breakthrough of LUMIOS technology. Flicker free, we've invested heavily in high quality advanced circuitry, which does which every light source should already do by default, which is removes the alternating current modulation from the light source. In other words, you're not having the alternating current, the AC power grid, which is constantly going off, on and off, over 100 times per second onto your light. That it just shouldn't be the case. It is the case because the industry has been focused on the cheapest, lowest quality, most efficient light, not on high quality and definitely not on the biological effects. So with flicker-free lighting, your nervous system can finally breathe. You can relax. You can focus, you can lock in, you can do the things you need to do, you can feel at peace and balance even in an indoor space. You can just relax. So LUMIOS is flicker-free. And finally, combating the excessive brightness of standard conventional LEDs, LUMIOS goes so far beyond. LUMIOS offers a revolutionary multimodal design, which means that each of the 3 LUMIOS products has multiple different modes which you can use for different contexts, different circumstances, and different times of day so that you have just the perfect light for every moment. And with this, you never have excess brightness that you don't want. So these are the breakthroughs that make up LUMIOS, and I'm going to walk you through each of our 3 bulbs now. This is LUMIOS. the world's first human-friendly LED. So LUMIOS is available in 3 bulbs which move with you throughout your day. We have LUMIOS Glow, which is the perfect light for day and night for virtually every scenario. Ideal for your kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, living room, hallways, foyer, and everywhere you need light. Glow has 4 modes of hormonally neutral lighting, mirroring first the classic incandescent lamp. We call this daylight mode. It's 2700 Kelvin. It's ideal for daytime use. Again, for example, in the kitchen, the living room, and in general, wherever you want to be around your home, reading, and so on. Just general daytime activities. It's 2700 Kelvin, which is almost identical to the classic incandescent lamp, with a tremendous output of near-infrared light. I will have to see if I can show this. So this is the spectrum of the raw incandescent LED. On daylight mode, you can see that nearly 50% of the spectral output is near infrared, above the red line, above around 700 nanometers. And there's a very low quantity of blue, and the color rendering RA is just about 98, which is practically the best ever in an LED. So that is the spectrum of daylight mode. We have afternoon mode, which is 2200 Kelvin and 70% relative brightness, so a bit warmer and dimmer light just for the later portion of the day, or for example earlier in the morning. It's a seamless flow into the evening mode, which is even warmer and dimmer. We call it delicious light for evening activity, socializing, dining, relaxing. This is an 1800 Kelvin color temperature, still featuring the ultra-high color rendering index, very, very low blue light, but still with near perfect color rendering. And it's 40% relative brightness compared to daylight, which is 100% as the reference, daylight mode. And then finally, we have my personal favorite. I'm kind of between evening on the glow bulb and candle mode. And LUMIOS works, as you can see, without any app, remote, or dimmer. In fact, if it's installed on a dimmer circuit, you need to keep it at maximum intensity and not dim it. And you simply screw it in to your existing E26 and E27 sockets, which are the vast majority of screw bases throughout the United States, North America, as well as Europe. In order to cycle through, LUMIOS is an A19 shaped bulb, as you can see, the shape of the classic incandescent bulb, one of the most classic bulb shapes in the world. And in order to switch through modes, you simply switch on and off rapidly. Say daylight, afternoon, evening, candle. You don't have to be that rapid. Now, when you turn LUMIOS off, for example, and you wait more than approximately 10 seconds, LUMIOS remembers the last mode you used. So I'm going to turn LUMIOS off and wait just a few seconds here. And it's back to daylight mode. So that way in the middle of the night, if you're on candle mode and you turn it off and you want it to go back on candle mode because you go to the bathroom or something and you don't want to have to go through the full cycle, it remembers the last mode used. So the switching occurs only when you do a rapid switch in under approximately 2 or 3 seconds. So this is LUMIOS Glow. If you're not sure which LUMIOS bulb to take, Glow should be the first choice because it is the ideal hormonally neutral lighting with broad utility throughout any space and any time of day. Now it's worth noting that LUMIOS is a specialty wellness lamp, not intended for general illumination, due to existing energy efficiency regulatory regulations which I've discussed. A lamp which contains a biologically relevant proportion of near infrared cannot be utilized as a general service lamp, so it's up to you to decide where you choose to use LUMIOS in a way that is appropriate for your needs and desires, as it is a specialty wellness lamp which is near infrared enhanced for this very particular purpose of addressing all the different issues which I've described throughout this presentation. Now, I'm going to show you the next bulb, which is something truly special. It's called LUMIOS Sky. LUMIOS Sky is defined by what you're going to see right now, sky mode. It is the world's first ever circadian activating light LED mode, or LED light, which is enriched in the hormonally activating blue wavelengths of light, which are desirable for the purpose of setting our circadian rhythm, simulating the open sky, which is why we call it sky mode, while being massively depleted in the shorter wavelengths of blue light that I described before, below approximately 450 or 440 nanometers, which contribute more to visible damage. This is very similar to the principle of the blue sync lenses, which we offer at Raw Optics, increasing the hormonally activating and stimulating wavelengths of light while still reducing the more deleterious, harmful, shorter wavelengths of light. So sky mode and the sky bulb essentially brings the energizing sky inside. It is a specialty product. It is intended for use in places where you want to prepare, to get ready for the day, and to perform. So my recommendation, the way I would use sky, is to put 1 or 2 bulbs in my bathroom, 1 in my desk lamp where I work, and maybe 1 in my home gym, or even to fit the entire home gym, so that when I'm preparing for a workout or performing, I use sky mode to activate this stress-based system, to mobilize cortisol into my muscles, to help increase the production of all of the stress hormones that regulate mineral balance and fluid balance and all the like, which are important and essential for physical performance and physical activity. But the key detail is that sky, and particularly sky mode within the sky bulb, is designed for brief intermittent use. Generally 10 to 15 minutes is advised by our scientific advisor, Dr. Wunsch, the expert. And you will absolutely feel, I already feel it now, the energizing, the activation, and the stimulation that sky has to offer. It is the ideal alternative to these traditional SAD light boxes, seasonal affective disorder, abbreviated to SAD, which people use to shine light on them, which also fail in the same way that human-centric lighting fails, by using blue pump LEDs with a peak around 450 nanometers, so very close to the more eye-damaging range of light, without really optimizing for the circadian activating wavelengths. So you're getting more of the eye-damaging, retinally harming wavelengths of light, and not as much of the circadian activating wavelengths, which are what those products are supposed to be doing. So more harm, more damage, less benefit. Sky is specifically and carefully designed, and has been now for years, to provide you with that stimulation, that activation, that energization which you need in order to increase your energy, focus, performance, mood, and so on, but for brief intermittent use. So sky, your bathroom, desk lamp, home gym, and the like. Use it before and during times of performance. We didn't just want the sky bulb to be a single-use product. We wanted to still make it functional. So sky also includes the same daylight mode as the glow bulb, 2700 Kelvin, warm white at 100% relative brightness, whereas the sky mode is 4500 Kelvin, so much colder. Again, brief intermittent use for a specific purpose. Now, sky also contains an evening mode. It's slightly different from the evening mode on glow due to technical limitations with also having the sky channel. So it does not contain the ultra-high perfect color rendering index of the evening mode on glow, which is the main reason I recommend everyone have glow in your general spaces where you want to have that perfect seamless transition from incandescent bulbs to the Edison kind of bulb, that warm lighting, to candle, having that natural flow from 2700 Kelvin to 2200 Kelvin to 1800 Kelvin to 1200 Kelvin, which is candle mode. This evening mode is 2000 Kelvin, so it's not Kelvin. So it's not quite as warm as the 1800 Kelvin evening mode on the glow. We had to combine two different LED channels to produce it. It's still an amazing, delicious, warm evening light, and it's a fantastic option if you want to have a warmer evening mode in a place where you've already installed a sky bulb. But for general use, for most spaces where you aren't going to want this indoor stimulus, this hormonal activation, for all the reasons I've described on an ongoing basis, Glow is the preferred choice. Sky is particularly beneficial for the sky mode. But again, to make sky as versatile as possible, we also offer candle mode. So you can still go to the candle mode, which is identical to candle mode on Glow. 1200 Kelvin, ultra warm, candle-like light. It's like timeless candlelight for winding down, reading late, and as a night light. Same applies for candle mode on Glow. So that's Sky, LUMIOS Sky. Once more, bathroom, office, desk lamp, home gym. Places where you want to prepare and perform. LUMIOS Sky, everyone. Bring the energizing sky inside. And now, last but not least, a bulb which I think may be the favorite for many, especially for those in the biohacking and wellness world. It's called LUMIOS Candle. So for those who want this ultra warm candle-like light, I'm not sure if the video properly conveys just the beauty of this light and how amazing it is. But candle allows you to have candle mode not just at the dimmest level, 12% relative brightness, as you have it on the Sky and the Glow bulbs, but it allows you to have candle, or this pure firelight, at 3 different brightness levels. This is 100%, this is 40%, and this is 8%. So of course you can't see me unless I come down here. Hello. So 100%, we call this fire. 40% relative brightness, we call this oil lamp. And 8% relative brightness, really nice for the evening, for any space where you just want to wind down, candle mode. So the candle bulb has fire mode, oil lamp mode, and candle mode, which is nearly identical, even slightly dimmer, but almost in an unnoticeable way, to the candle mode on the other bulbs. So we recommend placing candle in very specific places. Your nightstand, for example, where you really never want, for example, more blue light. So take a couple for your bedroom and your nightstand in particular. For your lounge, so a place where you just want nothing but pure vibes. Maybe in your living room, but maybe just one of your lamps or fixtures contains a candle bulb for that perfect evening atmosphere. As accent lighting in a hallway or in a particular space where you just want to create this amazing vibe, maybe in a kind of in-between room or a space where you're just passing through a night. And of course, as a nightlight, candle makes the ideal nightlight. It has 0 blue light, and this is the true uniqueness of candle mode. So these are the 3 LUMIOS products. I'll go back to Glow on daylight mode just so you can see me as I wrap up here. 3 bulbs which move with you throughout your day. A bulb, a light for every environment, and a mode for every time of day. With LUMIOS, by solving all of the problems of conventional LEDs, LUMIOS supports natural increases in energy, mood, focus, productivity. With the multimodal design, which moves with you throughout your day, LUMIOS supports natural evening relaxation, winding down, and optimal sleep, rest, repair, and recovery. As we've discussed so much about circadian rhythms and the body clock today, you understand how important it is that you get the sleep and repair that you need to truly succeed and to feel your best and be your best in your life. At Raw Optics, we truly believe that light can change the world, and LUMIOS is just the beginning. LUMIOS will be available soon in a variety of additional form factors, everything from LED strips to recessed lighting to the B22 lock and twist for our British friends and those in the Commonwealth. This is really just the beginning, but we believe that better light can truly change the world. We're so grateful to have you along with us for this journey. And ultimately, this is the manifestation of a childhood dream of mine when I first learned about the role that light plays in health to create the greatest lighting ever for humanity because it's a need that I saw. I always had a feeling that it would make a big difference, and now I'm sure that LUMIOS will change your life just as it has changed mine. Thank you so much for watching, and have an amazing day. I hope LUMIOS is just the beginning of a new life for you.